Welcome to the Streamlining Mobile Operations with Geocortex Mobile Viewer webinar. I am Cam Carmichael, the product manager for this project. First, a quick overview of today's agenda. We'll talk briefly about some of the challenges with traditional mobile data collection approaches. I'll quickly describe our new platform, and then I'll give an end-to-end demonstration of our new product. Finally, we'll leave you with some info on how to learn more. I'm often asked why we decided to invest in a new mobile viewer platform. Very simply, we received a lot of feedback from our customers that there were many challenges with the available options. It was hard to create an app which worked seamlessly for users who didn't have an internet connection, supporting that offline data capture story. It was hard to create a custom app without investing heavily in custom development, and if you did create a custom app, it was hard to keep up to date with the latest technology changes. Also, deploying custom apps to your field crew could be very complicated. With Geocortex Mobile Viewer, we've got you covered. Our vision for GMV is to build the most complete framework for configuring and building mobile, offline capable apps on Esri's platform. With GMV, you can easily create field apps. We'll see that in a moment. You can use them offline to perform all your field data collection activities on iOS, Android, and Windows devices. And we integrated GMV with Geocortex Workflow, which allows you to turn sophisticated business processes into a set of simple, guided, end-to-end interactions. This is a lot of high-level info, and I'm eager to show off what we've built, so let's jump into the demo. Here's Geocortex Mobile Viewer Designer running in my web browser. Geocortex Mobile Viewer is a bit of a mouthful, so I'll likely use the acronym GMV throughout this presentation to refer to it. This is Designer running in our SaaS environment. Of course, we also offer an on-prem installer for organizations that want to go that route. I'm going to sign in with my ArcGIS Online credentials as part of our Latitude org. It's also possible to configure our SaaS Designer to point to your on-prem install of ArcGIS Enterprise Portal if you aren't an ArcGIS Online subscriber. To get going, I'm going to create a new app, which I'll base on our default template. This is the basic layout for configuring apps in the Designer. We have a series of components listed on the right-hand side. Drilling into any of them allows for configuration of those items. But before we look at those components further, let's just use Designer to create a very simple app, and then we'll go explore it in Geocortex Go. All Geocortex Mobile Viewer apps are built on top of ArcGIS Web Maps. So I'm going to jump over to ArcGIS Online and grab the ID of a web map that I've created for this presentation. I'm going to go back to our Designer, go into the map area, and simply paste it. We can see after a moment that the web map reference is complete, and we can see the layers from the web map, which we could configure further by drilling down. Before we do that, though, we're just going to go ahead and save this app. When I save the app, we're actually storing the app config that we've created into the portal that you've signed into. This means that it's possible to use our SaaS Designer to access and save all the data into your enterprise portal if you choose, avoiding the need to install anything inside your firewall. With this first app saved, we're going to preview it in Geocortex Go. When I launch Go, I'm presented with the same login options that I saw when logging into the Designer. Before we log in, I'd like to draw your attention to this link at the bottom to try out the sample apps. If you don't have an ArcGIS identity, or if you haven't yet created an app with Designer, you can install Go from the app stores onto your device and use this link to load a sample app that we've created just to get a feel for it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and log in with my ArcGIS Online credentials. When I do, you'll see that I'm presented with a list, by default, of all the apps which have been shared with me. In our org, as we've been developing and testing GMV apps, this list has grown a little bit crazy, so I've filtered the list to only show the apps which I've created. You'll see apps here that are grouped by their stage in the development process. And we'll look a little bit more at this when we go back to the designer. But it's important to note that you only see apps which have been shared with you or which you've created. These apps are all private when I first create them, and I can then choose to share, for example, my test apps with my QA group and my production apps with my field workers. Let's go ahead and launch the app that we just saved. What I'd like to do here is just give a quick run through of all the basic features in GMV. Remember, at this point, all we've done is to add a reference to our web map. It's worth noting, as we get started, that while I'm showing you everything here running on my Windows machine, this could be just as easily my iPad or my Android device. Okay, so here we are in beautiful downtown Victoria. And as a native app, you'll see that the performance when viewing maps is fantastic. In the bottom right, we have our geolocate button. Tapping it once centers onto my location. Tapping it a second time puts the map into a mode where it rotates in the direction that my device is pointing. Unfortunately, I'm recording this demo on a desktop, so orientation always shows north up, which you can see indicated by this flashlight indicator. We also show a confidence indicator beside the geolocation button, which shows the level of precision of my device's location. In this case, again, because it's a desktop without a GPS device, it's not terribly precise. We have a layers control in the top left, which allows us to toggle layers on and off. We'll go ahead and toggle the water lines. We can see they become visible and not visible on the map. And we can also have support for layers that are not visible at different zoom levels, and you can see here for the hydrants that I need to zoom in to be able to see that layer appear. We have a search tool which allows me to search for something like Fort, a major street in downtown Victoria, and here we'll see that there's a number of buildings on Fort Street highlighted on the map, and they're presented also in the search results on the left hand side. We can choose to get details about any of these features by either tapping on them on the map or by selecting them from the results pane. We can also get details about a feature by simply selecting it directly off the map. When we do, regardless of how we get there, we see the feature details represented in this left panel. There's a few different things to look at here. First is the title of the feature. In this case, waterline with some identifier. This is configured in the Web Maps pop-up settings. Below that we have feature actions. This is a set of commands which will take the current feature as an argument. In this case, we can zoom to feature. If I happen to not be on it, zoom to feature will lock me in on it. But we could also kick off an inspection workflow for the feature or take some other action. Below that, we list the attributes of the feature, which fields are visible, and the order of the fields and the names of them is all configured in the web maps. And to show you the rest of the feature details, I'll have to go and identify a fire hydrant. And here we'll see any related records, in this case inspection records, and any attachments associated with this feature. This hydrant has been inspected twice, and we can drill through and see the details of the inspection records that were there previously. And we can easily create a new inspection record as well. I am Cam. No chains are required, and the PSI was 23. And we'll see that a new inspection record for hydrant 223 has now been created today. We can also see attachments that have been attached to this feature. In this case, images, of course, of fire hydrants. And while we're here, we can, of course, add new attachments to this feature, either from previously stored on our disk, or we can take a photo which will invoke the device's camera, in this case taking a picture of a fire hydrant that my friend Greg put on the wall. I'm going to go ahead and save that feature, that attachment. You can see that it gets added to the feature, and it's now part of this record. Moving up to the top right-hand corner, you can see the familiar I Want To menu. This is a fully configurable menu which you can use to expose various commands and workflows to your users. By default, we have a command to refresh the app. We'll see this in a bit. A command to return to the app selector screen. That was the screen where we originally launched this app from. And a command to return to the map's default view. Let's go ahead and return to default view. And you'll see that that's where we started when we first loaded this. Also off of the I want to menu, we can see at the bottom the user that is signed in, and we get a link to our options dialog. There's a few settings in here that might be of interest. Let's look now at adding and editing features. GMV was built tightly integrated with Workflow 5, and we decided to make the add-edit feature capabilities entirely with Workflow. This means that it is possible for a customer to write their own replacement workflow for adding and editing features if they desire something other than the default experience. I'm going to go ahead and click Add a Feature, and when I do, I see the results of a workflow which looked to see which layers I have add permissions on. When I select a layer, that first workflow calls a second, which then goes and builds a data entry form from the attributes for the selected feature layer. With this Add a Hydrant form now, I can easily add some attributes. I'll create a facility identifier. I'll give it a selected date, a description of downtown, and it was built by the Mueller Company. And I'm going to place it on the map at that location there just so that we can see it later. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. If I don't like that feature that I've just created, I want to make changes to it, I can easily edit it. Again, I see the same form dynamically generated. I can move its location. I can change the attributes. And if I've made a big mistake with all of it, I can just go ahead and delete that from the map altogether. And that brings us to working offline and using map areas. In July of last year, Esri introduced the notion of map areas into ArcGIS Online. This feature is slated for release in Enterprise Portal with the launch of 10.7, which is due out shortly. These map areas can be configured by an administrator, who then select the area of interest and the level of detail and whether or not to include attachments. The nice thing about these map areas is that they get pre-packaged when they're created. So when I go to use one on my device, the only delay is the time that it takes to download the package. But of course, not all Enterprise Portal users will have 10.7 available, and we recognize that working offline is critical to the success of this app. So we've also allowed for the creation of custom map areas. In custom map areas, I can create my own map area definition. I can choose an area that I'm interested in, a level of detail. I can choose whether or not to include attachments. And when I hit create, all we do is we create the definition of that map area. When I click download, the process is a little bit longer because we have to send a request up to the ArcGIS Online server in this case, and request that the map area get packaged before we can then go ahead and download it. So let's go ahead and live the life of a field worker. Let's activate a map area, in this case the downtown map area, and let's see how GMV works. Everything that we're looking at here is local data, local to the device, does not rely on my internet connection at all, and works equally well if I'm disconnected from the internet. I can go through a few of the things that we did before. I can do a search for Fort Street. I can do an identify on any one of those things. I can run the custom action that we looked at earlier. I can go to a fire hydrant and I can choose to make a change to this fire hydrant. There are no inspections or attachments for this particular fire hydrant, so I'll go and create one. When I do, I've now made a change to the local data, and you can see this little 1 indicator suggesting that I've got local changes that I need to push up to the server before I'm back in sync. I'm going to go ahead and maybe add an attachment while I'm at it. I don't have any attachments local on my disk, but I can take a photo of the fire hydrant on the wall. You see that now goes to 2. I can make any number of changes, and when I go back to the map areas, I now get the option to send my changes. I'm going to go ahead and send my changes, and while we're waiting for those to get pushed up to the server, you'll also see that there's an update link. This update link will now go and fetch any data that is new since the last time the map area was created and packaged. And when that completes, we can go back online. We can look at our fire hydrant, and we can verify that our inspection record and our attachment are both there waiting for us. That sort of concludes the out-of-the-box capabilities of GMV. Let's move on now and jump back to our designer interface. And let's run down the list of components on this right-hand side. App settings. This is the place where I put app-specific settings for building custom native apps on iOS, Android, and Windows. Once these settings have been entered, I'll be able to use our build service to build a branded app which could be deployed directly onto a user's device without the need for Geocortex Go. Branding. This is where I can select a color template and an accent color, and that'll run throughout the app. Let's go ahead and select a different color just so that we can see that we're making a change. We'll select that orange. Highlighting. This is a series of settings which control how features are shown and highlighted on the map. The I want to menu. And this is where we can configure this very important menu. We expose custom capabilities here to your users. And I'll come back to this area shortly. Map, recall that this is where we set the reference to our web map, and we can also start to adjust capabilities of the layers, and within those layers, the fields. Region is a collection of settings where I can set high-level things like measurement units and display, the default display of dates. And result details, this is similar to the I want to menu. This is where I can create and configure the feature actions that are displayed at the top of the feature details panel. And we can see the one item, zoom to feature, which we looked at earlier. Okay, let's go back to the I want to menu. And let's include a custom action which will run a workflow. I'm going to start by creating a new menu item. We're just going to go ahead and refresh the access token, which is telling me that I need to go ahead and log in. It auto logs me in. Back to our menu item. We're going to call this Run Survey. And the command for this is going to be to run a workflow that I've created, which was an emergency preparedness survey. If I start typing survey, you can see that my emergency preparedness survey immediately pops into the box, and I can grab it. I can also go and select an icon. Maybe that's what I think represents this survey. And I'm going to go ahead and hit File, Save. Let's jump back to Geocortex Go and simply say I want to refresh my app. At this point, Go is going out and looking to my ArcGIS Online account, seeing that there's a change to the configuration for my app, downloading that new configuration, and applying it. And so my I want to menu is now orange, and several other elements within the UI will have an orange hue to them. I can see if I look here that I have a survey button, and this Run Survey button is going to run the workflow that we've just linked. I'll go ahead and run that, and we can see that this is my emergency preparedness survey. It's not a particularly sophisticated workflow. It does demonstrate how you can build a form using different types of inputs. I can fill this form in, I can hit next, I can continue. I didn't take it terribly far, but that gives you the idea of how that workflow might work. I think I'm pretty happy with how our app's shaping up at this point. So I'm going to jump back into GMV Designer, and I'm going to go ahead, I've saved my app, and I'm going to look at the deploy options for my app. I'm going to look at the deployment strategy, which says that all apps start as development apps and get directly pushed to production when I'm happy with them. I'd really like my testers to get involved, so I'm going to change the deployment strategy. I'm going to go ahead and save that strategy, and I'm going to push this app that we've just built to testing. What this is doing is it's creating an entirely separate copy of the app, of the underlying web map, in case there's anything there that I want to be able to change, and I'm going to be able to give access to that to my QA department to go and do some testing. I'm going to jump back to Geocortex Go, and I'm going to say return. And now I'll see that our app exists both as a development app and as a test app. And this is the instance of it that I could give to my QA team to be able to go and work with. When I launch this test app, it is, as we expect, exactly the same as what we were just looking at before. Good news. The QA crew has decided that the app looks fine and we can go ahead and deploy it to the production environment. Recall that back in app settings, I mentioned that here is where I configure some items for my native apps, specifically an app name and an app icon, ID and version. The app name and icon are what would be visible to your users on their device. That's the app that they would launch. If I now go to deploy, I can choose to push this app to production, and when I do, I'll get the option to build an app. This is where I could choose to build an output for a specific platform, which would require me to include platform-specific information to create a signed app. So in the case of a Windows app, I would need a PFX file and a PFX file password. And the output of this build process then is a file, either an APK file for an Android, an IPA for iOS, or an AppX bundle for Windows, which I could then use to install directly onto my users' devices, or to push through a mobile device management platform, or even submit to the App Store if that was desired. That said, if the Geocortex Go experience is sufficient for your users, it can provide a simple and robust way to get your apps into the field. So that about wraps up the demo part of this webinar. Let's just jump back to the slides and review a few of the things that we looked at. We've got our Geocortex Mobile Viewer designer. Quickly configure and build mobile apps with our intuitive web-based designer. We've got mobile apps which are always in sync. Administrators can configure defined work areas. Their users can create their own custom work areas if that makes more sense. Edits that are made while the user's offline in the field can easily be synchronized back into the database. And we didn't cover this, but changes that are made to the database can also be pulled down into the map areas for a user. And because we built Geocortex Mobile Viewer on the latest version of Esri's ArcGIS Runtime SDK for .NET, we offer a compelling and sustainable approach to mobile application development. We will continue to make changes to add new features as new features are rolled out through that environment. We will continue to fix issues as they come up, as they become available to us. We stay on top of all of that ongoing development effort so that you don't have to. And our integration with Geocortex Mobile Viewer 5 is really one of the strongest, most compelling features of the application. We didn't spend a lot of time in the demo. Unfortunately, we didn't really have time to delve deep into workflow, but any complicated or sophisticated business process that you can model using workflow, you can make available to your field workers. And that adds an enormous amount of flexibility and power to our applications. And of course, we've got Geocortex Go, the companion app that allows you to preview during the development process, but which you can also use for deployment. And we talked about a couple different deployment models, and it's worth just reviewing this slide, I think. Geocortex Go, available on the 3 different app stores, works with the output of our Mobile Viewer designer, which in turn consumes web maps and creates apps. And your field crew can access that entire stack working through Geocortex Go. We can also support models where people want to build custom apps. The configuration and development process is all the same, and then our app build service will allow you to build a custom app which you could deploy onto your field workers' devices through a number of different means, really bringing a custom experience to them. Finally, learn more. Go ahead and download Geocortex Go and use the try functionality that we've built in. Kick the tires, as it were. Visit our landing page at geocortex.com/GMV, and feel free to reach out and contact us for more information. So, thank you. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for watching. We hope you find our Geocortex Mobile Viewer platform as exciting as we do, and We look forward to hearing from you soon.